In 1992, a massive explosion killed the chief prosecutor of the mafia in Italy. It was an act of revenge ordered by one of the most ruthless bosses in the history of the Italian mafia. Some called him the Short due to his low stature, while his enemies referred to him as the Beast. He rose through the ranks of the Sicilian Mafia, leaving a trail of violence and bloodshed. Salvatore Rina, known as the Beast, was born on November 16, 1930, and grew up in Corleone, a small agricultural village near Palermo. The second of 6 children, he left school at the age of 7 to help work on the family's 3-generation-owned land. A tragic incident marked his youth when, at the age of 13, he and his family encountered an unexploded bomb on their way home. His father tried to deactivate it, resulting in an explosion that killed his father and one of his brothers. Reena experienced violence early on, and at the age of 13, he had a dispute with another boy, resolving it by shooting the boy in the leg, causing him to bleed to death. This incident led to Reena's 12-year prison sentence, though he served only 6 due to good behavior, being released in 1955. Upon his release, Reena found acceptance in a new future within the emerging post-war Italy, where the mafia gained influence. His timing was opportune as the Allies, concerned with restoring order and avoiding associations with fascism or communism, inadvertently or intentionally allowed mafia figures to rise to power. Reena, often called the Short, formed an association with Bernardo Provenzano, another peasant who had left school to work in the fields. Together with Luciano Leggio, they formed the Holy Trinity of Corleone, with Leggio as the dominant figure. This marked the beginning of Reena's life dedicated to crime and violence within the Sicilian Mafia. Leggio built his faction, including Reena and Provenzano, and in 1956 their faction entered into conflict with Michele Navarra and his followers. Navarra, the undisputed leader of the local Corleone Mafia family, was assassinated on August 2, 1958, leading to continued violence. After Navarra's death, Reena and Provenzano sought peace, leading to a meeting with 3 followers of the recently murdered Navarra. However, instead of peace, the violence persisted, and after Navarra's death, those loyal to him sought reconciliation, resulting in a meeting between Reena, Provenzano, and 3 followers of the slain Navarra. Despite the attempt for peace, the violence continued, and the death of Navarra marked a turbulent period for the Sicilian Mafia. In an attempt to get answers, Reena, along with Bernardo Provenzano and another mafioso, opened fire, leaving casualties in their wake. Tensions in Corleone escalated, and the possibility of peace faded. Executions planned by the Leggio faction were carried out in broad daylight, signaling a change in strategy and a disregard for peace. Reena stood out as the most reliable assassin for the Leggio faction, eliminating rivals on the streets or in places where they sought refuge. The wrath of Leggio extended even to non-mafia locales. Reena, Provenzano, and Leggio increased the power of the Corleonesi, underestimated initially due to their origins in a relatively small village. By the 1960s, Leggio, Reena, and Provenzano had hunted and killed dozens of followers of Navarra, forcing them into hiding. The situation peaked with the Chiaki massacre, where a car bomb targeted at Salvatore Greco claimed 7 law enforcement lives. Reena and Leggio were arrested and tried in 1969, but were acquitted due to threats to jurors and witnesses. Hiding again, they faced accusations for the murder of Michele Cavata, known as the Vialao massacre, where a mafia squad led by the Holy Trinity of Corleone killed Cavata and 3 others. In late 1969, Palermo mafia bosses concluded that Cavata was responsible for the first mafia war with a bomb in Chiaki. Leggio and Reena were tasked with eliminating Cavata, resulting in the assassination on December 10, 1969. Provenzano, injured in the shootout, earned the nickname the Tractor. The Corleonesi used their notoriety to ally with Palermo bosses, finding support from Capo Gaetano Badalamenti. Provenzano and Reena became obedient assistants, carrying out murders according to Badalamenti's orders. In 1970, the Sicilian Mafia Commission, recognizing the Corleonesi's growing influence, granted them favor, solidifying their position in the mafia hierarchy. The commission, initially consisting of 10 members, was reactivated. It was initially governed by a triumvirate composed of Gaetano Badalamenti, Stefano Bontate, and the Corleonesi boss Luciano Leggio. Leggio, often on the run or entangled in legal troubles, appointed Salvatore Rina as his representative on the commission. Despite appearing equal to the powerful Palermo bosses, the Corleonesi still needed to solidify their involvement in the lucrative drug trade enriching the mafia. Conflict arose when Stefano Bontate and other Palermo bosses refused to share drug trafficking profits. Inexperienced in the drug trade and lacking funds, the Corleonesi sought help from other mafiosos to initiate their operations. The Corleonesi quickly engaged in other businesses, making it clear they had no intention of following traditional mafia rules. Unable to participate in drug trafficking, they turned to kidnapping for quick money. However, this tactic angered other bosses in the triumvirate as it directly targeted the class providing substantial profits through extortion and bribery. Ignoring the repercussions, the Corleonesi did not inform anyone when they carried out their first attack against the Italian state in May 1971. Luciano Leggio participated in the ambush and assassination of Judge Pietro Scellione and his escort. Salvatore Rina, becoming the face of the Corleonesi in Palermo, gradually built a solid base in the city, establishing new relations with mafiosos across the island. This growth of influence did not go unnoticed by Stefano Bontate, who openly ridiculed Rina, calling him the peasant from Corleone. This further infuriated Rina and Badalamenti, who had initially welcomed the Corleonesi. Badalamenti chose to support Bontate, setting a trap against Salvatore. However, Salvatore, sensing trouble, stayed away. The Corleonesi became extremely cautious, attending meetings one day and postponing them the next. In 1974, Luciano Leggio was arrested for the murder of Michele Navarra 16 years earlier. While Leggio retained influence behind bars, Salvatore Rina became the new de facto head of the Corleonesi. The new commission argued that the kidnappings were making the mafia unpopular, and police investigations were damaging the clan in whose territory the kidnappings occurred. Rina kidnapped Luigi Corleo, one of Sicily's wealthiest men and father-in-law of Nino Salvo, a tax collector and friend of Badalamenti and Bontate. Corleo died when his family refused to pay the ransom. Although Badalamenti and Bontate suspected the Corleonesis' involvement, they couldn't prove it. During the 1970s, Sicily became a crucial point in the international heroin trade, particularly in refining and exporting the narcotic. The profits from heroin surpassed those from traditional activities like extortion and usury. Salvatore Rina played a significant role in this shift. Rina aimed to take control of the market, planning a war against rival mafia families. In the late 1970s, Rina orchestrated the murders of various public authorities, including judges, prosecutors, and members of the Carabinieri. These killings served to intimidate the state and incriminate the Corleonesis' rivals. Unlike other mafia bosses who often appeared alongside politicians and mayors, Rina and the Corleonesi operated as fugitives, rarely seen by other mafiosos. When they targeted police officers or judges, investigations often focused on the more visible members of the mafia. Rina's involvement in heroin smuggling was not direct, given his lack of natural connections to the drug trade. However, he took control of families with such connections, replacing their leaders or compelling individuals with drug trade ties to join his faction by eliminating existing bosses and placing his lieutenants in charge. This allowed him to control a business not naturally associated with his territory. Rina showed little interest in international affairs beyond drug trafficking. Despite his rough appearance and robust build, unlike commission members who could present themselves as legitimate businessmen, Rina never attempted to do so. He was known for extreme cruelty, with a keen instinct and ability to eliminate anyone posing a threat. Around 1981 and 1982, during Rina's reign, approximately 1,000 mafiosos were assassinated and at least 200 disappeared without a trace. Rina orchestrated retaliatory strikes while maintaining an overwhelming bloodbath. The infamous Room of Death, a tiny apartment in Palermo controlled by one of Rina's men, was used for torturing and murdering victims, dissolving them in acid or dismembering and throwing them into the sea. Rina's involvement in drug trafficking and violence did not diminish his memory or organizational skills. He was known for remembering names and details, using his remarkable ability to implement plans that allowed his men to infiltrate families and take control. Rina was a personification of cruelty, quick to reward those who favored him and eliminate those who offended him. His brutal tactics included strangling victims himself, with subordinates disposing of the bodies. In his war, Rina also employed betrayal, often convincing rivals to join him and then ordering their assassination when they were no longer useful or their ambitions posed a threat. This strategy extended even to two of his most loyal and ruthless assassins, Pino Greco and Filippo Marchese. In January 1983, after deeming Marchese no longer useful, Rina ordered Greco to assassinate him. Years later, Rina commanded Vincenzo Puccio and Giuseppe Lucchesi to gun down Greco when he became expendable. Checking how this person's ambitions increased, by the end of 1983, Salvatore Rina was in control of the Sicilian Mafia. Rina's mafia rule went against all traditions, involving the killing of children and women. His strategy included turning families against each other and corrupting loyalty within families. Initial attempts against Salvatore Rina were tentative due to political and physical dangers, making success uncertain in a climate of great peril and a history of violent reprisals. Giovanni Falcone, a native of Palermo, emerged as a key figure in the new mafia investigations. Originally a bankruptcy investigator, Falcone used financial investigation techniques against the mafia, tracing money and proving that individuals with no legitimate sources of income couldn't have acquired the millions passing through their accounts and reflected in their properties. Falcone also tracked narcotics movements, connected them to individuals, demonstrated money transfers, and showed that the Sicilian Mafia controlled drug trafficking to the United States. Simultaneously, authorities in the United States were pursuing the same traffickers along the distribution chain. An Italo-American task force was formed to exchange operational information and enhance cooperation. This collaboration extended to the highest levels of politics in the United States and Italy. The result was the Maxi trials in Italy, including cases involving the pizza connection and some commission cases in the United States. While the Corleonese's tactics initially helped them become the most powerful clan in Sicily, they turned against them when a high-ranking mafia convict, Tommaso Buscetta, became the first Sicilian mafioso to inform and cooperate with authorities. Buscetta, having suffered losses at the hands of Rina's killers, believed that becoming an informant was the only way to save himself and seek revenge. Buscetta provided substantial information and testified in the Maxi trial held between 1980 and 1987, which condemned hundreds of mafiosos. His testimony marked the first instance of a Sicilian mafia member testifying in a court of law against the mafia. He identified over 400 mafia members, described the organization's hierarchy, and explained how the structure made commission members legally responsible for the actions of soldiers. Through Buscetta, Falcone constructed an indictment holding accountable those who had ordered the murders of hundreds of mafia members, politicians, judges, and police officers over the past decade. Although the goal was to create a democratic organization, Buscetta explained that authority was effectively imposed by the man in control, Salvatore Rina, the Beast. For the first time, prosecutors demonstrated a direct connection between the actions of the Sicilian Mafia and the control exerted by Salvatore Rina. The confessions of Buscetta and the skill of Giovanni Falcone triggered a vast new crackdown on the Sicilian Mafia, leading to the arrest of hundreds of its members. Some followed Buscetta's example and became government witnesses. As law enforcement pressure intensified, Italy prepared for an unprecedented trial. Salvatore Rina, however, remained unconcerned, confident in the government's past defeats and anticipating further successes. What he failed to recognize was the significant public support that Falcone had garnered during his pursuit of the mafia. People were fed up with the mafia's actions, having lost the traditional support the mafia provided to the poor and in times of need. After the Maxi trial, the government successfully attacked organized crime, with Tommaso Buscetta's revelations also linking government and industrial figures in Italy to the mafia. This marked a turning point. The Maxi trial, from 1987 onwards, resulted in a significant victory, with over 300 convictions, including Salvatore Rina, who, despite being a fugitive since his release in 1969, was sentenced to life in absentia. Reena, optimistic about favorable appeals, remained confident. However, after the Maxi trial, an unusual event indicated the situation in Italy. Despite Falcone being expected to succeed the retiring head of the Palermo investigation office, an elderly, inexperienced magistrate was appointed instead. Falcone was rejected for the position, and the successful prosecutors were publicly denigrated, facing frivolous and baseless investigations, virtually halting the ongoing investigations. Frustrated, Falcone saw his acclaimed work during the Maxi trial forgotten. Despite being invited to work in Rome with a new Minister of Justice, his transfer was viewed as evidence of his failure. Nonetheless, Falcone proved to be even more dangerous for the Mafia, planning a broader assault against it. When the Italian Supreme Court refused to overturn the Maxi trial convictions, sealing the fate of hundreds of imprisoned mafiosos, Rina's strategy had failed, not Falcone's. Mafiosos were furious and became a wounded beast. The new period of Rina's violence began with the murder of Salvatore Rina in March 1992, a powerful Sicilian politician and close friend of the Mafia within the government. This was a warning to the Christian Democratic Party, whose policy of peaceful coexistence with the Mafia became politically unviable. Less than 3 months later, the Sicilian Mafia took another step in its escalation against the government, resulting in the most costly mistake for Giovanni Falcone. Threats of death became part of Falcone's life. Despite the constant threats, Falcone pressed on with his work, taking every humanly possible precaution. He maintained a philosophical outlook, not fatalistic, believing that the enemy was behind him, but wanting to achieve what he could while he could. However, the Mafia, led by the beast Reena, had meticulously planned his assassination. On May 23, 1992, at 17:56 and 48 seconds, a seismic movement was detected in Palermo, Sicily, not caused by nature, but by a 500 kilograms explosion of trinitrotoluene placed underground. This ended the lives of Judge Giovanni Falcone, his wife, fellow magistrate Francesca Murillo, and their 3 bodyguards. Falcone, a symbol of the anti-mafia struggle in Italy, should be remembered as a hero. His life demonstrated that one person's efforts can make a difference in the lives of others. The public reaction to Falcone's death took on the dimensions of a national tragedy. Incredulity, shock, and indignation swept the country. It seemed that Reena and the Mafia were winning the war, and the people partly blamed the government. This triggered a kind of popular and civic revolt in Palermo, other cities in Sicily, and throughout Italy. Protests manifested with women hanging sheets with protest messages in windows and balconies in Palermo. They pledged to continue displaying these sheets as a sign of protest until Falcone's killers were brought to justice. The discussions on the Mafia's connections with politicians in Sicily resurfaced, reaching the parliament. To continue Falcone's work, another legendary anti-mafia prosecutor, Paolo Borsellino, was appointed as his replacement. 2 months later, on July 19, 1992, another explosion shook Palermo, causing the death of Borsellino and 5 members of his escort. The public outrage intensified, and government officials attending the funeral were attacked by furious crowds. The escort service rebelled against the government's poor efforts to protect them, and the public demanded the strongest response against the Mafia to date. Immediately, 7,000 army soldiers were sent to Sicily to show that the government, not the Mafia, was in charge. New laws were enacted, creating a witness protection program in Italy, encouraging hundreds of Mafia members to become government witnesses. 2 categories of people turned against Reena: members of the losing faction who cooperated against him, and members of the winning group, or those co-opted because of their involvement in the drug trade. The most interesting group included the guards and drivers who had the latest information, fearing they were about to be killed, and decided that the only way to save themselves was to cooperate against Reena. Over time, this group grew, and on January 15, 1993, without much pomp and without resistance, the tide began to turn. The police arrested Salvatore Rina while he was driving through the streets of Palermo. Initially, he claimed to be an itinerant laborer visiting the city, but it soon became clear that he was the notorious beast Reena. Public satisfaction over Rina's arrest cooled when it was revealed that during his 30 years as a fugitive, Rina had lived in Palermo with medical attention for his diabetes. He even registered his 4 children under their real names at the local hospital. Astonishingly, he had visited Venice on his honeymoon without being identified. Many, indignant and angry, declared that authorities only arrested Rina due to the pressure they faced from public opinion after the murders of Falcone and Borsellino. Seeing how easily Rina had evaded justice for so long became an example of what many did not hesitate to define as apathy, if not complicity, on the part of Sicilian authorities regarding the mafia. Despite already being sentenced to 2 life imprisonments, Rina was once again tried for more than 100 murders, including those ordered against Falcone and Borsellino in 1998. Rina was sentenced to a new life imprisonment for the murder of Salvatore Rina, a politician suspected of having ties to the mafia, who was shot dead in 1992 after failing to prevent the imprisonment of mobsters in the Maxi trial. In the mid-1980s, Rina remained imprisoned in a maximum security facility in Milan, with limited contact with the outside world to prevent him from continuing to rule his organization behind bars, as others had done in the past. However, there is speculation that in some way, the beast continued to direct and influence the organization from behind bars. Also nicknamed the Capo di tutti capi for the power he held during his 20 years of glory, Salvatore Rina sowed terror during those nearly 2 decades in Sicily and within the Cosa Nostra, which he had taken control of in the 1970s. On November 17, 2017, with multiple convictions, he finally died. The beast succumbed to natural causes after spending a few days in an induced coma due to terminal cancer. He was 87 years old.